Dear listener, not every story begins with intention. Some begin with an accident, a moment when ordinary plans collapse and something far greater unfolds. The story of the island where Dajjal is chained begins exactly this way, not with prophecy being sought, but with sailors lost at sea. Before he embraced Islam, Tamim Ad-Dari was known as a traveler and merchant who often sailed across the Mediterranean. The sea was not unfamiliar to him. Sailors like him understood winds, currents and routes that connected distant lands. Journeys across water carried risk, but they also carried routine. A voyage could begin like any other: calm skies, steady wind, predictable direction. But the sea has a way of reminding humanity how fragile control truly is. During one of these voyages, Tamim and his companions set out across the waters expecting a normal journey. The ship moved forward under ordinary conditions, its crew confident in their course. But as the days passed, the weather shifted. The wind began to grow stronger. What had been manageable currents turned restless. Then the storm came. Storms at sea are unlike storms on land. There is no shelter, no walls, no firm ground beneath your feet. Waves rise like moving mountains, and the sky itself seems to collapse into the water. A ship becomes nothing more than a piece of wood, tossed between forces far greater than the men steering it. For Tamim and his companions, the storm did not last hours. It lasted days. The winds pushed them far from the route they knew. Direction disappeared. The horizon offered no guidance. The sailors could no longer say where they were or where the currents were carrying them. Contrast defines this moment. Experienced sailors versus uncontrollable nature. Planned routes versus drifting uncertainty. Confidence versus helplessness. For nearly a month, the ship drifted across waters they could not recognize. Food was limited. Fatigue grew. The men aboard could only wait as the sea decided their path. The familiar world of trade routes and known harbors faded behind them. Ahead was nothing but open water. Then finally land appeared. At first it was only a dark shape on the horizon, a shadow rising from the sea. But as the ship moved closer, the sailors realized it was an island, relief mixed with uncertainty. An island meant rest, fresh water, and perhaps safety. But it also meant entering a place completely unknown. They lowered their small boat and rowed toward the shore. The sand beneath their feet felt solid again after weeks of drifting waves. Yet something about the island felt strange. It was quiet, too quiet. No signs of people, no smoke from fire, no movement among the trees. The sailors began to explore, hoping to understand where they had arrived, but they had no idea that this island was not simply another place on the map. It was the beginning of one of the most mysterious encounters ever reported to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. An encounter that would reveal a warning about the greatest trial humanity will ever face. The island was quiet in a way that made the sailors uneasy. After weeks trapped on a drifting ship, they had expected signs of life, birds, smoke, perhaps even distant voices. Instead, the land seemed still. The wind moved through the trees, but beyond that, there was almost nothing. Tamim Ad-Dari and his companions stepped cautiously across the unfamiliar ground. Their senses were alert. After surviving a violent storm and drifting for nearly a month, they had learned not to trust appearances easily. An unknown island could mean refuge or danger. As they moved deeper inland, the silence broke. Something shifted ahead of them. At first, they could not tell what they were looking at. It was a shape, large, moving, yet strangely indistinct. As it approached, their confusion turned to fear. The creature was covered entirely in hair, so much hair that they could not distinguish its face from its body. They later described it with uncertainty. They could not tell where its head ended and where its limbs began. Its appearance was unlike anything they had encountered before. The men froze. A moment earlier, they had been explorers searching for water and shelter. Now they stood facing something unknown, something that did not resemble any animal they recognized. Then the creature spoke. Its voice cut through the tension of the moment. It addressed them directly, asking who they were and why they had come to the island. The sailors, already shaken by the storm and their long journey, were now standing before a speaking creature they could not explain. Fear tightened around them. Contrast filled the moment. Human certainty versus the unknown. Familiar experience versus something beyond it. Courage versus instinctive caution. They demanded to know what it was. The creature answered with a name, Al-Jassasa. The name itself carried mystery. It suggested something that observes, something that gathers information. But Al-Jassasa did not threaten them. It did not attack. Instead, it pointed them towards something even more unsettling. It told them that a man inside a nearby monastery was waiting to meet them. Waiting. Those words deepened the unease among the sailors. How could someone be waiting for them on an island they had reached only by accident? The storm had carried them there without warning. No one should have known they were coming, yet the creature insisted. The man inside the monastery, it said, was eager to hear their news. The sailors hesitated. Their instincts warned them that something about this island was deeply unusual. But curiosity, and perhaps the need to understand what was happening, pushed them forward. They followed the direction Al-Jassasa had given. Ahead of them stood a structure rising from the quiet landscape, a monastery old and isolated. Its walls looked heavy and silent against the sky. Whoever lived inside had been there for a long time. The sailors approached slowly. They did not know that behind those walls waited a figure bound in chains, a man whose name would become one of the greatest warnings the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ever gave to humanity. The monastery stood alone against the quiet landscape of the island. Its walls were old and heavy, the kind that suggested long years of isolation. For Tamim Ad-Dari and his companions, the structure felt less like a refuge and more like a place hiding something unknown. Still, they approached. The strange creature had not threatened them. It had simply directed them here, insisting that someone inside wanted to see them. But the sailors could not ignore the feeling growing in their chests, the sense that they were stepping into something far beyond an ordinary encounter. They pushed open the entrance and stepped inside. What they saw stopped them instantly. Before them was a man, but not an ordinary man. He was enormous, larger and stronger than any person they had seen before. His body was restrained by heavy iron chains. His hands were bound to his neck. His knees were tied together. Thick shackles fixed his legs to the ground. It looked as if every effort had been made to ensure he could not escape. Yet despite the chains, the man's presence felt overwhelming. His size alone made the sailors uneasy. The restraints around him did not make him appear weak. If anything, they suggested that whoever had bound him believed he possessed terrifying strength. The sailors hesitated. This was not what they expected to find on a deserted island. A chained prisoner in a monastery, guarded only by silence and a strange creature outside. Before they could speak, the man addressed them. His voice was deep and direct. He did not greet them with confusion or surprise. Instead, he began asking questions that felt strangely specific. "Where have you come from?" they answered cautiously. They told him they were Arabs who had been sailing when a storm carried their ship away from its course. For nearly a month, they had drifted across the sea before finally reaching the island. The man listened closely. Then he asked them something unexpected. "What has happened to the date palms of Baisan?" The sailors exchanged confused looks. Why would a prisoner on a remote island care about date palms from a distant region? Still, they answered. The trees were still producing fruit. He nodded, absorbing the information. Then another question followed. What about the lake of Tiberias? Does it still contain water? Again the sailors answered, yes, the lake remained full. The man seemed to reflect on their words carefully, as if every answer confirmed something he had long been waiting to hear. Then he asked the question that truly unsettled them. What about the prophet of the unlettered people? What has he done? This question carried weight. It was no longer about geography or agriculture. It was about a man whose message had begun spreading across Arabia. The sailors explained that a man had appeared in Mecca claiming prophethood. They told him that this prophet had migrated to Medina and that people were beginning to follow him. At this, the chained man leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed. His interest was intense. "Have the Arabs followed him?" he asked. "Yes," they replied. He paused for a moment, then said something strange. "It is better for them that they follow him." The sailors now felt something deeply unsettling. This prisoner knew about the outside world. He knew about events far beyond the island. And yet he was chained here, waiting for something. The tension in the room thickened. Then the man spoke again, revealing the truth about who he was. And the sailors would soon realize that the figure bound before them was not simply a prisoner. He was the one the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had warned humanity about, Al-Masih Ad-Dajjal. The atmosphere inside the monastery had already grown heavy with unease. The chained man's questions were strange enough, but the intensity with which he asked them made the sailors feel that something far greater was unfolding before them. His interest in distant lands, in lakes and palm trees, and especially in the Prophet of Arabia, suggested that he was waiting for a very specific moment in history. Then he spoke again. His voice carried a certainty that made the sailors uneasy. "I will tell you about myself." The men stood silently, their attention fixed on the massive figure bound before them. The iron chains around his body clinked slightly as he shifted, but despite the restraints, his presence felt powerful. It was as though the chains were not signs of weakness, but signs of containment. Then came the words that froze the room. "I am Al-Masih Ad-Dajjal." For a moment, the sailors struggled to understand what they had just heard. The name itself carried weight. Even before Islam, whispers about a great deceiver had circulated in different lands. A figure who would appear near the end of time, spreading chaos and testing humanity's faith. And now, standing before them, bound in chains on a hidden island, was a man claiming to be that very figure. Dajjal continued speaking calmly, almost as if he had been waiting years for someone to arrive and carry his message to the outside world. He explained that he had been restrained here, unable to leave. The chains that bound him were not temporary restraints placed by ordinary men. They were part of a divine decree. He was being held until the moment Allah would permit his release. Contrast filled the moment. Captive versus future power. Silence versus coming chaos. Present restraint versus future freedom. The sailors listened carefully as he spoke about the future. He declared that a time would come when he would be allowed to leave the island. When that moment arrived, he said, he would travel across the earth rapidly, entering almost every city and land. But he made one exception. He said there were two places he would not be able to enter, Makkah and Medina. Angels would guard their entrances, preventing him from entering them. No matter how he tried, those sacred cities would remain protected. The sailors absorbed his words with growing fear. They were not hearing a story they were standing face to face with someone claiming to be the greatest trial humanity would ever face. He remained bound in chains. This detail mattered deeply. His power, whatever it would become, was not independent. It was controlled by divine decree. He could not leave the island until Allah allowed it. Dajjal spoke as if the outside world was moving toward a specific moment, a moment when the conditions would be right for his release. The questions he had asked earlier suddenly made sense. the palm trees of Bison, the water of Lake Tiberias, the emergence of the final prophet. He was watching history unfold from captivity, waiting for signs that his time was approaching. When he finished speaking, the sailors felt the urgency of what they had witnessed. They had not simply encountered a strange prisoner on a remote island. They had encountered a warning. A warning that the greatest deception humanity would ever face was not a myth or distant legend. It was real, and it was waiting. Eventually, Tamim Ad-Dari and his companions would leave the island and return to the world they knew. But the story would not end there, because when Tamim later traveled to Medina and shared what he had seen with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, something remarkable happened. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ confirmed the truth of the encounter, turning a mysterious island story into one of the most powerful warnings in Islamic history. When Tamim Ad-Dari eventually reached Medina, his life had already changed. After learning about Islam and accepting the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he became a believer and part of the growing Muslim community. But there was something he carried with him, a story unlike anything the companions had ever heard. It was not simply a traveler's tale, it was the memory of an encounter on a remote island with a chained man claiming to be the greatest deceiver humanity would ever face. Tamim shared his experience with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of dismissing the story as strange or impossible, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gathered the people together. He called the companions to the mosque so they could hear something important. When they assembled, he addressed them with seriousness. He told them that Tamim Ad-Dari had informed him of an incident at sea, a story about sailors who had drifted to an island and encountered a chained man who called himself Dajjal. Then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said something remarkable. He explained that Tamim's story matched what he had already been telling them about Dajjal. For years, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had warned the Ummah about the coming of the false Messiah, a man who would appear near the end of time and spread deception across the earth. The companions knew these warnings well. They had heard the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ describe Dajjal's trial as the greatest test humanity would ever face. But now, for the first time, there was a direct encounter from someone who had seen him. Contrast filled the moment. Strange sailor's tale versus prophetic confirmation. Personal experience versus divine guidance. The companions listened closely as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ repeated Tamim's account. He described the storm that carried the sailors far from their route, the mysterious island, the strange creature Al-Jassasa, and the massive man bound in chains inside the monastery. Then he confirmed the key detail. The man on that island was indeed Dajjal. This confirmation transformed the story from curiosity into warning. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not present the story merely to satisfy curiosity about hidden islands or mysterious creatures. He shared it to remind the believers that the threat of Dajjal was real. The greatest trial in human history was not a myth or legend waiting in imagination. It was a reality waiting in time. The companions felt the weight of this message deeply. If Dajjal was alive, restrained somewhere in the world, then the warnings the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had been giving them were even more urgent. Yet the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ balanced this fear with clarity. Dajjal was not roaming freely across the earth. He was contained by Allah's decree. His release would come only when Allah permitted it. Until that moment, humanity was safe from his direct deception. But safety did not mean neglect. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ continued to warn the Ummah repeatedly about Dajjal. In many gatherings, he reminded them to seek protection from his trial. He taught them to recite the opening verses of Surah Al-Kahf as protection. He emphasized strengthening faith so that when deception appears, believers would recognize truth. The story of Tamim Ad-Dari was not meant to frighten people endlessly. It was meant to prepare them. And that preparation is the real reason the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ shared the story with such seriousness. Because the trial of Dajjal would not be defeated by curiosity or speculation, but by faith. The story of the island where Dajjal is chained often captures attention because of its mystery. A violent storm, a strange creature, a hidden monastery, and a massive man bound in iron chains. These images naturally stir curiosity. People wonder where the island might be, whether it has been discovered or if it could be somewhere hidden on the world's maps. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not share this story so the Ummah would search the oceans. He shared it so the Ummah would prepare their hearts. The true danger of Dajjal was never meant to be geographical. It was spiritual. His trial will not simply be about power or destruction. It will be about deception. Deception so convincing that many people will struggle to distinguish truth from illusion. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ described Dajjal's trial as the greatest fitna since the creation of Adam. No other test in human history will challenge faith on such a massive scale. This is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ warned his companions repeatedly about him. In nearly every gathering, he reminded them to seek protection from the trial of Dajjal in their prayers. Contrast reveals the lesson clearly: curiosity versus preparation, fear versus faith, speculation versus guidance. It is easy to become fascinated by the mysterious details of the island. The creature, Al-Jassasa, the monastery, the chains. But focusing only on those details misses the real message. The real message is that the greatest deception humanity will face will not be defeated by intelligence alone. It will be defeated by faith. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught specific protections for believers. One of the most powerful is the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf. He said that whoever memorizes the opening verses of this surah will be protected from the trial of Dajjal. This is not a random instruction. Surah Al-Kahf contains stories about faith, trials, deception, and the importance of holding firmly to truth even when the world becomes confusing. Another protection is sincere reliance on Allah. When deception spreads and illusions appear convincing, only hearts anchored in faith will remain steady. The believer who strengthens his relationship with Allah today is preparing himself for trials that may come tomorrow. The story of Tamim Ad-Dari reminds us of something important. The greatest threats in human history do not always appear suddenly. Sometimes they exist quietly, restrained by divine decree, waiting for the moment when Allah allows events to unfold. Dajjal is not roaming the world today. He is contained. His release is part of a future that only Allah controls. But the warning given by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ remains active. Every generation must strengthen its faith. Every believer must guard against deception, because when the time comes, the real protection will not come from knowing where the island is. It will come from knowing where the truth is.